Before we dive in, why don't one of you explain a little bit what CX Day is?
Sure. So CX Day is really a day where we can dedicate celebrating our customers and the work that organizations and individuals do every day to create that great customer experience. So, a lot of the time, we focus on negative feedback, but really today is all about what really makes organizations great and how organizations make the experience great for their customers. So that's why we're kind of talking today about broadcasting specifically customer feedback in a positive way. Audrey, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think CX Day is a day to celebrate people like us who work in the customer experience space and help our customers understand and manage their customer experience. And as far as feedback, we talk about designing programs and net promoter score and customer satisfaction, and all these metrics are thrown around, and everybody wants customers to have a great experience. And I think generally they do. But what the focus is often put on is the negative experience. We talk about closing the loop and making sure you're doing service recovery and all these things that go along with those people who had the not so great experience. So today, on a day that we're celebrating customer experience, we thought that it would be make sense to talk about how to broadcast the positive experience and the positive feedback that you get. So I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah, that's so true. I feel like as a society and humans in general, there tends to be a negativity bias. So it's really important to, acknowledge that we have promoters of our brands and advocates for our brands. It's not just enough to know that they exist, but it's also important to find out why they are promoters, why they like your brand, what do they like about it, and then also on top of that, just building the relationship with those important customers.
That's actually a really good point. I've seen programs designed where if somebody is a detractor or had a negative experience, there's a follow-up question to say, tell us more about that. What was your problem related to? But often that follow-up is left out for promoters or people who had a really good experience. And I think what you just said is it's so important to know how did they have a good experience? What made it so good? Did somebody help them? What did they like about it? Because that will help you understand what's driving it and be able to replicate and then amplify.
Yeah, exactly. It's also great to know what your business is good at doing, and then to capitalize on that. It's great to be able to reduce churn and figure out why, maybe there's negative feedback coming in, but at the end of the day, it is important to focus on what you're good at and then really capitalize on that. If you're constantly just cleaning up messes and stuff, it's hard to kind of capitalize on what you're actually good at. So it's important.
Yeah.
And even as a
totally.
company, it helps it gives you a point to acknowledge those employees that are really helping build your brand in a positive way. And as an employee, that positive recognition, it goes a long way as far as employee culture.
Yeah, that's true. It builds the employee culture and boosts morale a lot, and kind of encourages people to really put forth the effort to have positive CX experiences.
Yeah, I
Okay.
agree with all of that. All right, let's pull up the slides because we kind of put together an outline of ways to broadcast positive customer feedback. And here's sort of the baseline, this is low-hanging fruit, pretty easy to set up. The first one here is called creating recognize alerts. So I mentioned earlier the close the loop process where you want to follow up with people who had negative experiences. This is moving that over into the positive side, those your promoters, and creating an alert for people who had a positive experience. So Courtney, can you talk a little bit about this one?
Sure. Yeah, so we have today's session kind of broken down to 3 different levels. We have our baseline efforts, our mid-level efforts, and then our VIP level efforts is what we're calling them. So baseline is kind of like, I don't want to say the bare minimum, but it is kind of like, if you want to get started in your CX program, really, what's the best way to kind of get into it? One of the things that we recommend definitely is setting up alerts. So alerts are email notifications that can be triggered based on logic of the survey that you specify. So for instance, if you have a customer experience survey and the first question asks an NPS question, Net Promoter Score. How likely are you to recommend your brand? Scale of 1 to 10. Typically that's broken out into 3 different sections. There are detractors, which rank a 6 or below, passives that are 7 or 8, and then promoters, which are 9s and 10s. And typically what we see, sometimes we see detractor alerts, but in this case, we like to call promoter alerts recognize alerts. So that can be anything from a promoter alert, people who rank a 9 or a 10, or we also have questions called what we call recognize alerts. So that can also be a question like, did somebody go above and beyond for you during your transaction? Yes or no? And then if they say yes, sometimes there's a follow-up for them to be able to specify who that was and mention the name. So there's 2 different alerts here that we can do. One of which again is promoters alerts, and then one is recognize alerts. And then additionally, having those alerts, it's great to see on an individual basis, but then I also think it's really important, as Alexandra touched on before, to be able to kind of share those results with your team, whether that's, you know, your individual CX team or the broader company itself at town hall meetings or weekly Zoom meetings, whatever it might be, to kind of recognize the people that really are going above and beyond. And also it builds an environment where people are kind of striving to replicate those types of situations and experiences. So I think sharing the alert results on a consistent basis with your team is also extremely important, because otherwise, you know, these alerts can come in, and while individuals may see them, whoever the alerts themselves are emailed to on the team, they'll see them, but on the grand scheme of things, the team itself might not see them.
Yeah, that's great. I think the one that's maybe more rare is the one that we're calling a recognize alert, where we're putting a question into a survey that says, did anybody that you interacted with today go above and beyond to meet your needs? And that might be someone who showed empathy, or someone who gave the customer an upgrade, or it could be anything, but it's something that turned into a moment of truth for the customer, where they felt they had an emotional response that was positive, that said, you know what, this person, this employee of this brand really went and helped me get what I needed, or if they couldn't help me, I could tell that they empathized with my situation, and it created that emotional connection for me. And those are the things that people remember long term. So these are the things that you should be alerting your employees on, to say, you interacted with this customer and they had this really positive experience, so positive, in fact, that they wanted to mention you in the survey. What we do is we ask this question, did anybody go above and beyond? If you say yes, then you get a follow-up question that says, tell us more about the experience. So now you know that this person had this positive experience, and you get the details of it so that you can share it back with your employees and your team. And you should be doing this consistently. That's the second part of it. Maybe at a monthly team meeting, you're going through and saying, you know, we received X number of alerts or feedback pieces this month that said all these experiences were positive, and here's a couple of the quotes that we received, and share that with your team. And I think, one, it creates a culture of talking about positive experiences, and two, it allows your team members who were called out in a positive way to get that recognition, and to amplify it to the rest of the team, so that they are seeing, people are being recognized internally for positive experiences, and that this is something that our brand is focused on.
Yeah, and to add to that, we also have a functionality on our PeopleMetrics platform where we can attach what's called a root cause to it, a root cause tag. And I could see this being really beneficial. Basically what that means is, you know, you would have a series of categories that we would program for you guys, that could be potentially a root cause of what triggered one of the recognized alerts. So as Audrey mentioned, maybe it's, you know, the employee gave them a discount, or maybe the employee was extra friendly or very empathetic to a situation they were going through, whatever it might be. When you go through the alerts, we have the ability to actually associate a tag with it. So it's also really interesting to kind of take a deep dive into these alerts and then find out, you know, the root cause. It's like, okay, that's interesting. Like 90% of recognized alerts are because customers feel like the employee is empathetic, you know, and maybe that's some sort of value that can be implemented into your culture even more because you realize how much your customers appreciate it. So there are more than one way to just dive into these alerts and kind of get as much insights as you can from it.
Yeah, that's such a good point to associate it with root cause.
Mhm.
Okay, well, I feel like we've explained this pretty well, that sort of the baseline is to set up notifications when you get positive feedback, and then to make sure you're sharing it internally. So here now we're looking at sort of that mid-level of effort that you can put into your customer experience program to broadcast your positive feedback. And the first one here is to schedule one-on-one meetings with customers with the idea of thanking them for their feedback, and then requesting that they will be a reference for you, or that they will refer you to other people in the industry or their company, other departments, or people they know. I think this works best in a B2B scenario where we're talking about the client contact and they might recommend another department contact, but it's not a bad idea to think about it in a B2C situation where you have a lot more feedback. If you pull out the best feedback or feedback from your VIP customers or high lifetime value customers, I think you can focus it a bit and still use this advice to schedule meetings with customers, really just to thank them for their feedback, to acknowledge that you see that, you know, they had a positive experience, and then ask them for what will help you.
Yeah, that's so true. I think this is kind of taking it a step further and really starting to build the rapport and the relationship with your customers and kind of having that one-on-one conversation with them. And you know, obviously it's not like the first time you talk to them, you're asking for a referral. It's kind of like an over time building that relationship. And it's very interesting because I find, you know, a lot of the time new customers do come in from word of mouth. Most of the time it's from advertising. I get that, but word of mouth I think is extremely reliable. When I hear from somebody, you know, that they recommend personally a brand or a company or whatever it might be, I take that to heart a lot more than I do an advertisement. So I just, for me, I think the referrals are really, really important. And you know, also, as Audrey said, individually thanking your customers and letting them know that their business is appreciated. And you can do that in a couple of ways. Sure, you can do it one-on-one meetings. You can send them, you know, a nice handwritten note. You can email them. You can call them, whatever it might be. There's a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be, you know, too strenuous, but there are a couple of different ways that you can do that.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it before, but I thought of it while we were talking, that it's great to ask for referrals, but people might not have them top of mind. But you can also
Right.
ask them to be a reference for you,
Right.
which I
Right.
think is a good request. And yeah, really individually thanking them goes a long way. You know, there's often a thank you message at the end of a survey, but I think it is important to go follow up and say, thank you for providing the feedback. And even though I don't have to follow up here because there wasn't a problem, I'm acknowledging that you took the time to provide your feedback. And I'm so glad that it was positive. Thank you for sharing your experience with us,
Mhm.
because we're learning from positive experiences too. So it really is important to thank customers for putting in the effort to get you the feedback. But it really is a good idea to kind of parse through your promoters or your people who are really satisfied or had a great experience, even if maybe they weren't a promoter, but they had a recognize alert. You could still talk to them and say, I'm so glad that you had this positive experience with this employee, and tell me about these other things that went on. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing
Mhm.
kind of thing. I think there's a lot of scenarios in which it makes sense if you have the capacity and the resources to follow up to get more information and thank them for providing the feedback.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
All right. And then thinking about what is a VIP level effort in broadcasting customer feedback. So we have a couple things on here. One of them is to conduct a customer advisory board. And so a customer advisory board is a custom panel of your best customers. So it's people that you're really interested in hearing level customers or certain personas or people with specific experiences. But what you do is you identify them, you invite them to join your panel. They join the panel usually for a set period of time, usually for a year. And then they're part of that panel, and you can go out to them in different ways and get feedback over the course of that year. So you can do things like qualitative feedback like focus groups or interviews or discussion boards, or you could do quantitative feedback. You can send out surveys or a combination of them. And really you can use this to get really deep insights into things that are important to your most important customers. So I think sort of building upon what we've seen is if you have a customer who provided something that was really useful in one of your regular feedback surveys, that might be someone you identify to be part of your advisory board, so you can really learn more about their experience over time with your brand, and sort of what they'd like to see in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know in this particular instance, we're talking about customer advisory boards or CABs in a sense of the promoters of your business and people that are the most important to your business. But I do want to just touch on the fact that you can also have customer advisory boards that are a mix of your customers, you know, a mix of maybe some detractors or some passives, things like that, to kind of get a mix feedback to kind of understand, you know, what maybe could change in the business. I know that's not necessarily what we're talking about today, but I just did want to touch on that you can have a mix in your customer advisory board as well. But yeah, I mean, CABs is what we call them for short, are really for, you know, deeper insights, and also it acts as a way to build the relationship with the clients, because in a way, I mean, you're telling them, hey, we value your feedback, we want to hear from you. And I think, you know, speaking to the mid-level efforts that we talked about a little bit ago about getting referrals and starting to build the rapport and talking to them on a one-on-one basis, and then also in this VIP level efforts with the customer advisory boards and things like that, it's interesting because, you know, even though they might be considered a promoter, mistakes are bound to happen. Not every experience that customers have are going to be perfect, but when you have a rapport like this and a relationship with these customers, oftentimes whenever a hiccup does come down the line, because it's bound to happen, no company is perfect, a lot of the times it can be washed away because they have this positive interaction with you guys. So I think that's also something to think about, that, you know, having that relationship with them can also help to appease any future things that could potentially happen, because it's bound to. I mean, it's life, you know? So yeah, so that's,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, that's great. I think everything you said made sense there. The other thing I thought of is that customer advisory boards can help you if you're trying to make changes in your company. So you have a group of people, and maybe you we're highlighting people who had positive experiences to join your board. If you have to make strategic changes in your company, you want to talk to people who already love you to see, are they still going to love you if you make these changes? You want to know, because they're, you know, at that point, they're your most important customers. You need to keep them and keep them happy. So advisory boards are often used to test different types of products or directional changes that the company might take, and see what the feedback is, what, you know, what's the sentiment related to these proposed changes. And it really makes sense to ask people who have already provided you positive feedback, so you know how they're going to feel if you make some change, and see how it will affect them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then to add on to that, our second point here regarding building relationships with these customers, another great aspect is creating case studies around their positive experiences. So case studies, you know, can be anything from, you know, a little blurb on the website to your newsletter to, you know, referral or recommendations and referrals to other clients, things like that. It's really helpful. And by case study, we're talking about really, you know, a problem that a prospective client or an existing client may have had within their business, and then how you were able to resolve that issue, and show some tangible results for that, to really highlight the importance of the CX experience.
Yeah, definitely. And everything we've talked about is really about building relationships. Just that it's important to focus on the people who have provided you positive feedback, rather than just people who have had problems. And then certainly creating case studies or just sharing that story of the positive experience that these customers have had is so important. Courtney, you mentioned it earlier, word of mouth and recommendations. We're all consumers, and we all know if someone you trust tells you that, hey, this company is great to work with, or, I provided them feedback and they got right back to me and it was so nice to hear from them. If that story is shared, that word of mouth is really powerful. So all of this speaks to that you're going to get people who had those positive experiences sharing them, and you want to make sure you have a full understanding of what that experience was like and that you've thanked them so that they want to provide feedback, positive or negative, in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I feel like we've covered what our points were, ways to share positive feedback that we've received. So I think we're getting close to the end here. I do see there are some people on. Alexandra, do you know if we got any questions today?
Yeah, let's get to a few. How do you know which customers to invite to participate in a cab?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we talked about it a little bit. So it can be people that, depending on what the focus of the cab is going to be, you might want to just take a cross section of your customers and say, we have customers across all these different things, and we want to make sure we get a good mix. Or you might say this cab is focused on our high value customers and people who have higher spend over some period of time, and you could do it that way. Or you could say people who have provided feedback in the last year and something else. So I think there's a lot of options when you're designing a cab. It sort of depends on what the focus is and what you're hoping to gain, what are your goals. But that's something that PeopleMetrics would help you with, to take a look at the type of program you're designing, and then we would make recommendations as to what persona or customer group or so on would be good to target to join the advisory board.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different ways that you can parse it. It could be demographics, age groups, things like that. Or as Audrey said, there could be different sectors of your customers. Whether they're promoters, passives, detractors, or new customers versus, more tenured customers, things like that. There are definitely different ways that you can kind of parse out who you want in the customer advisory board. And as Audrey said, there can be different types of customer advisory boards. So like I've heard of ones before where it's really just prospective and new customers. Whereas, maybe a different advisory board or a different group would be your more tenured customers. So there's lots of different ways that you can split it. But the beauty of cabs is that you really have a lot of freedom with who you want to include and how you want to go about the different sessions that you incorporate into customer advisory boards. It's a very flexible and very insightful way to gather data from your customers.
Great. And then we have another one here. What percentage of my time should I spend on promoters versus detractors?
Well, I know we kind of talked about it a little bit. I think it kind of depends on, really how many promoters versus detractors you have. So I think that's also really important. Excuse me. If you have thousands and thousands of detractors, it might be something that's important to dive into. And I guess that also just depends on the size of your business as well. Thousands and thousands could be small compared to, some of these large businesses out there. But it really just kind of depends on what percentage, what portion of your customers fall in the detractors versus the promoters. If you have, I would say more than 10% or even 15% detractors. I mean, I think that it's important to focus on it. I think it's always important to focus on detractors, but you also, like we said, don't want to spend all of your time on that as well.
I think another thing to think about is that you can segment your customers in other ways in addition to whether they're promoters or detractors. So you might have a group of high value or high impact customers that could be a mix of promoters and detractors, and you probably want to prioritize them over everybody else, and then go into, this is my promoter group and this is my detractor group. So you might have some sort of flag on customer records that says, this person is a VIP because of XYZ. And then if you get a response from them, you prioritize that above others because you've determined that they're very important for your business. So again, something that PeopleMetrics would help you design and manage with a customer feedback program based on your needs and your business. It's hard to say that there's a percentage mix without having all of that background, but we would help get to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. And we have one more here. What is the standard timeline to launch a CAB program?
Sure. So with a CAB, with an advisory board, you're receiving feedback over a year, and you might be reaching out 4, 6, or 8 times. Can vary over the course of that year. I think the startup time from a CAB is usually about 6 weeks, where you're designing the program, designing a screener to screen people in or out of the advisory board, and then going out and recruiting to the board. So I would say 6 to 8 weeks initially, including program design and recruiting and onboarding. And then once you have people on the board, it runs for a year, where you can reach out to them at various times.
Oh, great. Well, those are all the questions we have. So thank you both for sharing your expertise with us today. And thank you all for tuning in today. Have a very happy CX Day, and we'll see you next time. Take care, all.
Thank you.
Bye.